The ringing of her cell phone interrupts Ryouko's labors. When she sees that the caller is Tono Kouji, she unwittingly breathes a sigh of relief.
This is Tombo. What is it?
I've searched Fuminori's house.
Even over the phone, Ryouko can clearly hear the change in Kouji's tone. His is the dull, flat voice of someone who has had all the energy beaten out of him.
Fuminori has murdered people. He's killed too many people to count, and he's eating them.
Despite being an amateur, Kouji has already come face to face with something particularly horrible. In consideration of the shock he must have received, Ryouko decides to not say anything.
Omi and probably Tsukuba are already dead. Doctor, I was wrong.
The fact that you're still alive to make this call means that you haven't made a fatal mistake yet.
Ryouko says, praising Kouji in her own way. Whether or not he is comforted is a different matter.
Anyway, don't screw up this time. Do nothing until I return. What you're dealing with here isn't going to go down easily.
With her understanding of Saya deepening by the hour, Ryouko is able to make this declaration with new confidence.
Fuminori already knows that I'm alive. I didn't tell him who rescued me, but he's definitely on guard.
I see.
Kouji's actions were rash, but there's no point in regretting them now. The more proactive approach would be to figure out a way to use the pressure that Kouji must have placed on Fuminori. Besides, the fact that Ryouko's involvement is still a secret makes her a wild card. Depending on how she plays it, this advantage could be decisive.
Have you found anything, Doctor?
Not enough yet.
Ryouko answers, glancing sidelong at the loose-leaf pages still scattered across the table.
Let's see. I'll wrap this up by evening and return to Tokyo around midnight. You refrain from making any more trouble until then. Got it?
Yes.
The glazed-over quality of Kouji's voice is actually reassuring to Ryouko. She knows that he won't try to have everything his own way anymore. His is the voice of someone who has become a machine, able to do whatever it takes to accomplish a single goal. Kouji has decided to eliminate Sakisaka from Minori, and in order to complete that objective, he is even willing to accept the help of Ryouko, whose principles hardly mesh with his. A praiseworthy change indeed. After Ryouko hangs up, she gloomily counts the stacks of loose leaf that still need to be restored. There's no time left. She'll probably only be able to get the general picture. If she has to go into battle with only fragmentary knowledge, then there's one thing that she absolutely must decipher. Ogai's biological reports, which should contain information on the strength and weaknesses of the organism called Saya. All she can do now is pray for luck as she delves back into the mountains of paper. The hands of his watch move with agonizing slowness, as though counting down to the end of the world. With entirely too much time on his hands, Kouji went back to his apartment, showered, changed clothes, and even had his first full meal in days. He wanted to take a nap, knowing that he needed the rest. But no matter how hard he tried, sleep never came. Forcing himself to relax only made his nerves colder and sharper. With nothing else to do, he decides to wander aimlessly around the city until nightfall. Downtown Tokyo is bustling with peaceful revelry. Surrounded by happy, smiling pedestrians, brightly shining lights, and windows decorated early for Christmas. It seems as though all of the happiness in the world has been gathered in one place. Kouji takes it all in, burning it into his memory like it's the last thing he'll ever see. Is the world this beautiful because of the terrifying insanity lurking in the shadows? He will probably never be able to bask in the glow of the city again. Perhaps that is why everything seems so dear to him. Kouji gazes at the city for hours. It feels unreachably far from him, as though he's reading the obituary of his first love, lost in the distant past. His phone rings at 8 p.m. It's from Tanbo Ryouko. Their conversation is short, ending immediately after they decide on a place to meet. And so ends Tono Kouji's final night of peace. Ryouko arrives at the 24-hour family restaurant at 1 a.m., 1 hour later than agreed upon. She has a heavy-looking duffel bag under her arm. Kouji doesn't feel like asking what inside the bag is causing it to bulge out all over like that.
Sorry, I had a lot to get together.
Ryouko doesn't sound at all apologetic, but Kouji decides to not say anything and just nods expressionlessly. Only a few tables are filled at this hour, like lonely islands in the midst of a vast restaurant. After sending the lethargic-seeming waitress away with an order for 2 coffees, Kouji and Ryouko are left alone, as though forgotten in a corner of the dining area.
So, did you find what you were looking for?
Kouji asked bluntly, while sipping dutifully from his 3rd cup of watery, tasteless coffee.
I'd like to think I didn't make you wait for nothing, at least. I'm still not sure of anything, though.
I think Fuminori is pretty stressed too. I left him hanging for a day after I told him I'd call after all.
Do you think he's that concerned about meeting you?
His reaction to the name Saya was very clear.
In the silence that follows, Kouji tries to soothe his parched throat with another mouthful of weak coffee.
I see.
Ryouko mutters.
So it is Saya.
It's obvious that the frown on her face is not because of the coffee.
Have you found the answer, Doctor?
Kouji asks, practically demanding an answer.
Do you know what this Saya is?
Ryouko ignores Koji's question by pretending to be engrossed in her coffee. But that only works until her cup is empty. Staring at the brown stain at the bottom of her cup, Ryouko says, her voice hard and flat.
You were foolish enough to ignore my warning, but I'm just as stubborn, so I'm going to say this one more time. Tono-kun, you should go home and forget about all of this.
You really are stubborn.
Kouji replies, smiling bitterly instead of getting angry like you did before.
Are you saying I still haven't crossed the line separating me from you and Fuminori?
You still haven't seen the most damning part of all of this. As far as you're concerned,
Ryouko continues with a disparaging smirk.
Your best friend in the whole world suddenly went crazy and became a cannibal. That's all this thing is to you, isn't it?
That's all.
Unable to come to terms with what Fuminori has done, Kouji can only deal with it by clinging to the obsessive desire to kill Fuminori. Yet despite that, Ryouko makes this nightmare sound like just the beginning. Kouji still doesn't understand where her morbid cynicism comes from, nor does he want to.
You say there's something more, but aren't you just imagining it?
That you can think means that your wounds are still shallow.
Once again, Ryouko brusquely states her opinion as fact, her tone making it clear that she doesn't care whether or not Kouji is satisfied with her explanation.
If you back out now, they'll probably heal, given time. You haven't crossed the final line yet.
Without getting emotional like before, Kouji considers Ryouko's words. The final line. True. Fuminori is somewhere beyond that. Although Kouji has gone far enough to be willing to kill Fuminori, he has no intention of eating his enemy's flesh once he's dead. That, at least, still separates Kouji from Fuminori. Then, what about Ryouko, who's been treating Kouji like an ignorant fool ever since she saved him from the well? How close is she to Fuminori?
You're saying your wounds are deeper than mine?
In response to Koji's sarcastic question, Ryouko's cold smile becomes a bitter, self-mocking smirk.
This gun was my father's, you know.
Ryouko pats her duffel bag where the outline of something hard inside is clearly visible.
Because this disappeared from his gun locker, he was kicked out of his local hunting club. I feel bad about that. My parents were always proud of me. They probably never imagined that their daughter would steal a gun from their safe.
So you had good reason for doing that?
No, not at all.
Her quick denial isn't what Kouji was expecting.
At the time, the Ogai mess had already ended. At least, that's what I thought. He'd vanished without a trace, and I was sure that he'd never appear before me again. I didn't take this gun because I needed to shoot or kill something.
Then why?
Because I couldn't sleep. That's all there was to it.
Ryouko pauses, apparently needing time to decide how best to explain more clearly.
Until then,
She continues, choosing her words carefully.
I'd kept a nata hidden next to my bed. I couldn't stand being alone in my room at night, you see. I wanted to know that no matter how unimaginably insane the world might become, I had some choice other than just running around screaming. That's why I needed some kind of weapon that I could count on in my room.
Kouji is struck speechless. He's amazed, even impressed, that someone with such a serious case of delusional paranoia could function as one of the elite T University's leading doctors.
It didn't really work, though. My nightmares just got worse every night. A nata just wasn't enough to let me sleep peacefully. That's when I stole my father's gun. By cutting down the barrel like this, the shot spreads over a wider area and causes more damage. I hear that even in America, modifying a shotgun like this is a serious crime. With the gun sitting in the back of my closet, I was finally able to sleep. 1 night out of 3, that is.
At this point, Ryouko seems to have gotten everything off her chest that she wanted to. Smiling, like someone who just finished a hard job, she adds.
A gun's a great thing to have, you know. It really is. You can use it to blow your enemies away, and if that doesn't work, you can always stick it in your mouth and pull the trigger.
Doctor, you should get professional help.
Thanks for the honest opinion. You won't be able to talk like that for much longer, though. Not if you go any further.
Kouji is already doubtful that meeting with Ryouko before facing Fuminori was really the best thing to do. The one thing that Kouji and Ryouko have in common is an unwillingness to leave Fuminori to the proper authorities. Fuminori not only killed Kouji's lover and friend, who went so far as to defile their corpses, Kouji doesn't even want to give him the chance to get off with an insanity plea at trial. No matter what sins he must bear, Kouji will put an end to Fuminori with his own hands. If he doesn't, he knows that he will never sleep again. It helps to have a partner in crime, but only when that partner doesn't cause trouble. Ryouko talks big about exposing Ogai's secrets, but she might just have a head full of nonsensical delusions. If so, Kouji needs to rethink this whole thing.
If you're telling me to leave everything to you,
Kouji says with unflappable determination,
please give me some reason to trust you. Please prove to me that there's a reason you're so obsessed with Ogai. Show me everything he did.
So you'd go that far? Oh well.
Ryouko smirks and shakes her head in exasperation, and pulls a stack of paper out of her bag without further resistance. The sheets of loose leaf are bound only by a cord.
After you read one line, it continues on the same line of the next page. Anyway, just skim through it.
As directed, Kouji looks through the handwritten pages and gives up after less than 3 minutes.
Is this the manuscript for a sci-fi horror novel or something? It's a pretty bad joke. I didn't think Ogai had such childish hobbies.
Kouji deliberately scoffs at the document, doing everything he can to show contempt for what he just read. At the same time, he tries desperately not to remember the mountain of bones in Ogai's bathtub, and the unidentifiable smell permeating Fuminori's house.
The specimens and research papers that Ogai brought to the university 1 year ago were just as unbelievable.
Ryouko says calmly, coldly ignoring Kouji's disdain.
Apparently, he continued his research in secret, using our supplies without permission. But he made a mistake and was discovered. That's when things got crazy. Judging by the equipment he was trying to use, he meant to treat his experiment as a P3 level biohazard. To be honest, that might not have been sufficient for what he was dealing with. We should have had the nearby civilians evacuate, but the big shots did their thing and made the whole mess disappear. In exchange, we had to go to the trouble of eliminating every single rat from the campus, including the things that used to be rats, that is.
At their first meeting, Ryouko brushed Kouji off when he asked about Ogai Masahiko. Now, however, she's telling the whole story. Her voice is clear and emotionless as a machine's.
In the end, we gave up trying to explain what had happened. No one could figure out where the materials he'd brought with him had come from. In retrospect, everyone did the wise thing. They knew how to keep the boundary between reason and fantasy where it should be. I, unfortunately, was not so smart.
Ryouko pauses for a moment, then grins with self-disdain so maniacal that it strikes Kouji like a blow.
I searched everywhere for Ogai, flushed him out, and finally learned what he'd been doing. I'd found the people he'd been dealing with and those who'd encouraged him to perform his experiments. That's when I started sleeping with Nata. I'd learned just how absurd, full of holes, and unreliable our world's reason is, after all.
As though fleeing from the quiet insanity that he keeps glimpsing in Ryouko, Kouji finds himself paging through the loose leaf in his hands and reading a line at random.
The flesh covering the organism's body is not fibrous, but reticulated. In other words, it's an extremely tough substance that expands and contracts not in one direction, but in all directions. This means that slashing and piercing wounds would have very little meaning. Since the flesh can contract in any direction freely, any wound would be sealed instantly.
It's nonsense. What else could it be? If it's true, then everything else, all the logical laws that rule the world, is completely meaningless.
So, you believe what's in this, Doctor?
I lost any reason to doubt it long ago.
Ryouko reaches into her duffel bag again, this time removing a stainless steel thermos that looks about to hold 500 cc's.
This is the secret weapon that'll let us defeat Saya. It was a pain to get, but it should work like a charm.
I can't take this anymore.
Kouji snaps, no longer able to disguise his frustration.
I don't care what Saya is anymore. All I care about is finishing off Fuminori. I can't leave this to you.
I see.
Now that she's given up on persuading him, her assent is swift and cold. At this moment, Kouji's fate has likely ceased to matter to her.
All right then. You do everything you can to take down Sakisaka Fuminori. I'll take advantage of the opening you create. I won't get in your way, and I'll even take care of things when you screw up.
Despite the determination in her voice, Kouji can't bring himself to trust this paranoid doctor completely.
Do you have a reason to kill Fuminori?
I like things neat and tidy, you see. I can't stand people like him who lurk outside of the world. They're like cockroaches in your bedroom. Can you sleep with them scuttling underneath your pillow? The moment I find one, I kill it and destroy all trace of its existence. I have to, for the sake of my mental well-being.
Kouji understands her feelings, and they're similar to his, after all. Kouji doesn't want to bring a murderer to justice, nor does he want to take revenge for Omi and Yo. If he did, he could have just left everything to the police. The reason he can't is that the villain is Fuminori. The man that he believed was his friend has turned his whole world upside down. Kouji wants nothing more than to destroy all of this insanity, including his own betrayed self. His self-loathing is what's keeping him on his feet.
Okay, let's move in for the checkmate. Go ahead and call Sakisaka-kun out.
Kouji nods, pulls out his cell phone, and calls his friend for what will probably be the last time. The call goes through quickly, as though Fuminori was waiting for it.
Sorry to keep you waiting, Fuminori. I've finished my preparations.
Kouji, where are you?
Fuminori must have been quite anxious to hear from Kouji. His voice is hard and completely emotionless.
Let's just say I'm right behind you.
Kouji can't help but smile disdainfully at Fuminori's disappointment. Perhaps Ryouko's maniacal sadism has rubbed off on him.
Well, have you decided to let Tsukuba go?
Yeah, I suppose I have no choice.
He's lying.
Kouji thinks, remembering the contents of Fuminori's refrigerator.
Just what part of Yo did you eat, Fuminori? Did you carve that innocent girl up like a cow or a pig?
Kouji, bring your evidence along with all the files you've gathered. When I'm satisfied they're the real thing, I'll hand Yo over.
Fine. Where?
First come to Y Station on the O-line. When I'm sure you're alone, I'll tell you the exact location.
You're being awfully careful.
No tricks. You have 45 minutes.
Fuminori hangs up without waiting for Kouji's response.
He won't tell me his location until he's sure I'm alone.
Not bad for a mere medical student. I'm impressed.
Ryouko's praise sounds serious, drawing a glare from Kouji.
We'll leave my car here. Tono-kun, is your trunk large enough for a person to fit inside?
Yeah, but are you serious? You've seen too many movies.
This adventure is more dangerous than anything you've seen in a movie.
With those bold words, Ryouko grabs her duffel bag and rises from her seat.
So you're the one who chose this place to meet, right?
Yes. Why?
Take responsibility for the coffee,
she says, tossing him the check that was left behind by the waitress. Even after Kouji arrives at Y Station as directed, Fuminori calls him to make him change locations 3 more times. Kouji is beginning to doubt that Fuminori is trying to make sure that he's alone. He might just be using the time to guess when Kouji arrives at the designated location. Nevertheless, Kouji can't let his guard down. Fuminori might choose any moment to make sure he isn't bringing any help. If he makes mistakes and put Fuminori on alert, Ryouko would lose her chance to make a surprise attack. She'll just have to put up with the cramped space in the trunk for a little longer.
Come inside. Yo is waiting.
Fuminori hangs up without another word. After grabbing his new maglite from the glove compartment and checking that the revolver is still in his pocket, Kouji opens the door, making sure to pop the trunk at exactly the same time. Ryouko shouldn't need any more explanation than that. Realizing that the interior roof light will stay on and broadcast that the door and trunk aren't closed, Kouji quickly unscrews the bolt, then gets out of the car and deliberately slams the driver's side door hard. Glancing sidelong at the rear of his car, Kouji sees no movement whatsoever inside the barely open trunk. Ryouko knows what she is doing. She probably intends to wait until Fuminori's attention is focused on Kouji, then make her surprise attack. When he reaches the doorless, gaping entrance to the building, Kouji glances back the way he came. His Accord, parked at the gate, is perfectly hidden in a blind spot beyond the mountains of trash. Even if Fuminori is watching from inside the sanatorium, he shouldn't be able to see Ryouko crawl out of the trunk. It looks like she'll get her chance to take him by surprise. How many times has he stood alone like this, in some ominously silent place, far removed from his everyday life? It's as though sneaking into deathly quiet houses and finding traces of unimaginable happenings has become as normal as going to class. The rooms on both sides of the hallway are all open. Some are even missing their doors. Kouji sidles up to each entrance, checks to make sure no one is inside, then carefully proceeds on. The stink that has been assaulting his nostrils since before entering the old building has changed. Now, it smells more organic, like rotting meat. It's exactly the same as the smell that was filling Fuminori's house.
The organism's reticulated flesh freely expands in a manner that renders cutting and piercing meaningless. Meaningless. Meaningless.
Kouji grits his teeth and forces the madman's words out of his head. What good can come of taking them seriously? Now isn't the time for such useless... At the sudden noise, Kouji freezes and stares down the hall. It was a wet sound, like someone dragging their feet through a swamp, and it came from the room at the end of the hall. Something is there. Something that can make noise. Moving silently and keeping his light and gun at the ready, Kouji creeps in the direction of the sound. Now it sounds strange, like someone squeezing mud through their fingers, and as he gets closer, Kouji begins to hear some kind of animal's labored breathing. Could it be Fuminori? No, that's impossible. He should be holding his breath somewhere, waiting for a chance to ambush Kouji, not carelessly making noise. As he proceeds, the strange sound coming through the cracks in the concrete walls becomes clearer and clearer. Kouji finds himself standing at the entrance to a room. It's filled with a thick, viscous darkness, just like every other room he's passed. There is more than just darkness, however. Something is definitely there.
project.